Counter-Narrative News, bringing you daily news today on Saturday, the 25th of March 2023. The Iranian presence in Syria reportedly has conducted missile strikes against US occupation bases in northern Syria. This follows from yesterday, where the USA struck a Iranian-linked fighters in Syria, which the death toll has risen up to 19. That itself was following an Iranian strike against the US presence in northern Syria in Hasaka. There are two occupations in Syria by NATO countries, the US on one side of northern Syria and Turkey on the other side, both of which were invited into Syria by the Russian leadership, which itself was invited into Syria by the Syrian government in 2015. The Iranians remain in a very highly pressured situation as we go forward, especially in relation to Syria, but generally in the region. It's being squeezed by Russia and leading NATO countries. It's being squeezed by China, pushing it into normalization, into direction of normalization with the closest of Western client states in the region, states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The UAE has normalized relations with the close client state of the West and of the East in terms of Beijing and Moscow. That's the white settler colonial regime in Tel Aviv. Going over to Spain, the leader of China, after a two-day visit to Moscow visiting Putin, Xi Jinping is visiting Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Part of their discussion, they have generally very good relations and good communication, but Pedro Sanchez, Prime Minister of Spain, was talking about Ukraine in a manner of which that we were accustomed to the Chinese rhetoric around international diplomacy for several decades leading up to its more relatively toxic position now on the Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister of Spain, Sanchez, said the most important, the fundamental thing, he says, is to preserve an international rule-based order which depends on respecting the UN Charter. One of those fundamental principles is respecting territorial integrity, in this case the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which is being violated by President Putin, end of quote. Of course, Xi Jinping is not respecting the territorial integrity, forgive oneself, in relation to Ukraine. He's actually backing the Russian occupation of Ukrainian lands and posturing as some kind of broker in that. Well, that's just not going to work. But this reflects China's own anxiety in hugging the Russians closer in the outbreak, first of the Russian intervention in Kazakhstan in January 2022, followed then immediately pretty much by its intervention in Ukraine. Of course, the Chinese should reflect on themselves, as should the Iranians, that they failed to take a non-aligned approach in and around the onset of the conflict in Ukraine, which arguably could have won itself in the terms of China a lot more gains for itself, but it chose not to take that route. Going over to India, Congress leader Rahul Gandhi has been given a 2-year jail sentence by a court around apparently defaming the name of Modi back in a speech in 2019. Modi is the far-right nationalist leader of the BJP government in India. And Rahul Gandhi represents the Congress party, which is historically a secular party, but also quite toxic in its loyalty to Indian capitalism. As such, does not provide the answers to the divisions around the growing far-right politics in India, but is also part of the general de facto united opposition. But in this context, you can see that aside from the northern Indian and particularly the Punjabi farmers' victorious struggle and progressive struggle against neoliberalism and the far-right BJP state, that the Indian masses are still unable to find a formula and methods to counteract the BJP's racist and divisive toxicities, which facilitate their alliances with some of the most corrupt capitalist elements, including the now exposed, in terms of its deep corruption, the very powerful finance capitalist group Adani. Finally, going over to South Africa, Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is a radical grassroots anti-colonial socialist movement, has made some quite distorted, to say the very least, comments about the Russian and Soviet history. He has argued that the International Criminal Court should not lay a finger on Vladimir Putin if he visits South Africa for a summit there. Malema, on the one hand, is correct to identify the ICC as a neo-colonial racist entity that's overly obsessed in a racist posture with African leaders, and it doesn't go after other global leaders who have violated international law, not least around the Bush and Blair conflict and destruction of Iraq in 2003. Where Malema is wrong is to suggest that the current Russian state and its leadership is any continuity from the Soviet socialist state and also the communist Cuban comrades. So Malema is saying he's trying to conflate the right-wing capitalist leadership of Russia today with the Soviet Union before, which did support many African nations, including in South Africa and Angola and in other places, the resistance against apartheid regimes backed by Western imperialism. Malema knows very well that Putin and Russia today is a creation of Western imperialism itself after the defeat and the destruction of the old Soviet socialist state in 1991. And as such, the politics of Vladimir Putin is in very much counter-oppositional to the radical socialist and anti-racist politics of the old Soviet state. That's Counter-Narrative News. We're wishing our audiences a fantastic weekend. Please do continue to support us by encouraging your friends and contacts to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow us on our Twitter account at @counter_CNN. We wish you a fantastic weekend. Thank you.